We go for refuge to all the Buddhas, so that all sentient beings may realize Buddhahood. We go for refuge to all the Buddhas, so that all sentient beings may realize Buddhahood. We go for refuge to all the Buddhas, so that all sentient beings may realize Buddhahood. Okay, so Tara, if you can lead us. Power of Lord, I bow at your feet. His blessed mendicant that he keep to mountain retreat. You patrons, here are the auspicious connection for accomplishing the good of self and others. This hard to come by and easily lost body is well because it's met with your provisions. The richness of the earth with its fruits and seeds, and the deep blue sky with its rain and peace, are the connections that bring benefit to beings. The heart of this connection is the Dhamma divine. The illusion of a body brought up by parents, and the Guru's instructions so profound, are the connections that cause the Dhamma to grow. The heart of this connection is wholeheartedness. My caves in wild uninhabited valleys, and my Dhamma practice that is not mere words, are the connections for accomplishing my true heart wish. The heart of this connection is emptiness. Milarepa's endurance in meditation, and the faith of beings in all three realms, are the connections for the benefit of every being. The heart of this connection is compassion. The yogin who meditates on rocky peaks, and the patrons providing his sustenance, are the connections for us all to awaken together. The heart of this connection is the sharing of punya. The compassion of a kind and genuine Guru, and the patient meditation of good disciples, are the connections for holding the Dhamma firm. The heart of this connection is Samaya. The Abhisheka with swift Adhisthana, and our heartfelt and fervent prayers, are the connections for our quickly meeting again. The heart of this connection is auspiciousness. The essence of Akshobhya, Lord Vajradhara, please know the joys and sorrows of this mendicant. A very auspicious song. Auspicious meaning something that augurs something good. So this is a sign that, or something that's connections that are coming together in a way that's going to be wholesome and good and leading to enlightenment. So yes, this word auspiciousness is quite hard to translate. It's tashi. How do you translate tashi? Auspiciousness, yes. Needs a bit of explaining, but yeah. So maybe that will become clearer during the course of the weekend. You notice in this song about connections, the emphasis is very much on the Dhamma practitioners who are supporting and helping other practitioners, like the patrons or the people who support Milarepa in retreat. And this this song of Milarepa where he emphasises how the connection we make with Dhamma practitioners results in us reaching enlightenment together. So, if you can't apply yourself with great energy to your Dhamma practice, you can at least support someone else who is. So that's a very strongly in the ethos of among Tibetans, well, in the East generally, I found, especially but in Tibetan culture, this idea of supporting people to practice Dharma is like better than money in the bank. It's more secure because it will produce the kind of results you really want. So I'll be coming back to the song from time to time, but I'm going to talk to you now. Where's my plan? Oh no! Oh, there it is. Almost, yes. So I thought I'd start out with the lines that we start out with in the morning when we're singing the song that turns our mind away from samsara. Where it starts with that very waking up line, I always hope, of death comes without warning. All sorts of things come without warning, but among them is death. So, if you remember the verse, death comes without warning, it may come today. Now is the time to think of what heart connections mean. Now is the time to think of what goes beyond birth and death. Now is the time to discover and learn to trust the openness, clarity, sensitivity of our being, the indestructible heart essence of all beings. There's a lot to contemplate there, isn't there? Now is the time to think of what heart connections mean. Don't wait. Don't wait till it's, death has struck. Now, don't be tempted to think, oh, death is in the future somewhere. It could be, today. So we're not talking about the future, we're talking about our situation now. Now is the time. Now. Not later. Now is the time to think. Now, why did I put the first thing to think about as being heart connections? Quite often we're told to meditate on impermanence, aren't we? Now is the time to think about impermanence. But the problem for Westerners is that if we think about impermanence, then we tend to go towards nihilism. Everything's impermanent, changing, untrustworthy, bad news. So why dwell on it? Better just make the most of today and forget about it. Forget about the future, forget about anything else. So there has to be a reason why it's worth thinking about it now, in the midst of it all. So what is not impermanent and unreliable and just going to break apart and basically meaningless? What is not meaningless? That's the question, isn't it? And often we talk about Buddha nature, don't we? And we talk about openness, clarity, sensitivity, which, we come on to. But the reason why I put heart connections first is because at the time of death, it becomes very evident that it's our heart connections that give our life meaning. And even people who are not religious at all, who are not following a spiritual path at all, I'm quite struck with how they immediately think of their heart connections. Like, the last message from the planes as they were going into the Twin Towers, people were ringing their families and telling them they loved them. And I found that very touching and an indication that actually we do know that heart connections are what makes life meaningful. But what are they? What is our heart connection? I always find this also at funerals. If I mention heart connections, I can see that everybody there feels connected. They kind of, yes, that's why I'm here actually. And yet, if you have a totally materialistic view of the world, what is the connection now? The person's dead, gone, finished? Poof. So how can you still have a connection? Then people try to say, oh, well, it's memories and things, but it's not, it's much more than that. I think we know in our hearts it's much more than that. So now's the time to think, what does that mean? Of what is our connection with others? But of why is it those connections that give our life meaning? So I want you to think about that. What's real about a person, including ourselves? What's real about us? We talk in Buddhism a lot about what's not real about us. That's important, but only in the context of what is real. If we were only unreal, well, so what about anything? But what's unreal is what we think we know, and this takes a lot of practice and reflection to really recognise what we think we know turns out to not be true, and then if we then stop holding on to that, because holding on to that obscures what is real. So every time we let go of holding on to something that's not real, there's a sort of kickback, some sort of recognition of something. Oh, that wasn't real. Sometimes it's fear, but when you get over the fear, if you can stay there and remain confident in that space that's opened up, you kind of recognise the taste of freedom, you might say. The Buddha said that the taste of the Dhamma is always freedom, liberation. A sense of, I've let go of something and something's come alive in me. And it's always something to do with the heart, in the sense that, and I often point out to you what I've noticed, it's so often accompanied with which is called the primordial sound, but so often it's like or some kind of something's opening up or shocking or relieving, some kind of real something really meaningful and connected, interestingly enough. We don't feel disconnected, we feel more connected with others. It's like we're recognising the true nature of others as we recognise our own true nature. So there's a sense of increasingly recognising ourselves in others. So that comes now to the way I've decided to talk about it today is about focusing on the connection, what we mean about heart connection in relationship to the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha. Taking refuge even. Take refuge, it's a heart thing, isn't it? Recognising something in our heart, connection between that inspiration. Maybe we've only heard of the life of the Buddha, and we've met a few people who are following the Buddha, and there's a some kind of inspiration there, some sort of recognition. And this is the most important heart connection of all, isn't it? What connects us to awakening, which is simultaneously our own true nature, and simultaneously the true nature of reality. And that's a heart connection we have with that. We connect to ourselves through our heart, we connect to others through our heart, we connect to the Buddha through our heart, and it turns out we connect to the whole universe, the whole of reality through the heart. So now, that's the question. What are we talking about? What are we really talking about? Oh. When we say we hold someone in our heart, we don't ask ourselves, oh, do I mean my flesh heart, or do I mean something else? Do I mean something metaphorical? We don't, do we? You know, and even people who are quite, don't claim to have any sort of religious feeling at all, I notice use this language. I was very struck recently with these recent atrocities like the one in Manchester. There was so much heart language going on. I was very struck by that. Not connected to any belief system at all. And even it was not insane for that to be reported on the news in a totally serious tone of voice. Like in England, you can't quite talk about God's will, can you, on the news? I think you can in America, but in this country, what's the matter with him? Is he going a bit crazy? Doesn't he know? You don't talk like that. But you still can talk using heart language, which is just as mysterious, really. I mean, it's really mysterious. I think that it's something quite to be celebrated, that actually we can still talk in those terms with basically anyone. The only times I've run across people who don't want to talk in those terms, and, quite experienced Dhamma practitioners sometimes don't want to talk in terms of heart. But that's because they've chosen that's not the way they want to talk. Doesn't mean they don't know jolly well what they mean by it and what they want to mean by it, and usually if they won't use that kind of language, it's because it's been abused and they're angry about it, that people have used that kind of language insincerely or superficially, and so now they're not going to go near it, which I find really, really touching, because it just shows actually they know jolly well what we're talking about, probably even better than a lot of other people who use it very lightly. So I find that very connecting and reassuring. So this song refers not so much to Buddha, Dhamma and Sangha, not so much, it talks about Dhamma, but it talks about Guru, which is somewhat of a problematic term for us in the West. It's become a sort of jokey term in many ways, isn't it? Oh, who's your guru? What's your guru? Is it? Oh, yes, And teacher isn't much better when you put a capital T on. Oh, this is my teacher, It sort of sounds a bit precious, doesn't it? In some circles. It's a source of a great deal of confusion. And I've actually nearly finished a book on student-teacher relationship. And of course it's quite topical at the moment because of this these articles coming out about Sogyal Rinpoche's behaviour, which I have to say I've known about for a long time. But always in all these discussions, I notice, almost invariably, they talk about the teacher, or the guru, or the master, blah-de-blah-de-blah, and how the student should be, blah-de-blah-de-blah. And in all the texts about student-teacher relationship, it says the teacher should be blah-de-blah-de-blah, and the student should be blah-de-blah-de-blah. You know, it's all correct, but you then ask, so in practice, who are we talking about? You know, on the ground, in practice, who are we talking about? And some of these classical texts, and including all these things that people are saying these days about it, it kind of says, well, actually, these are the qualities a teacher should have, but of course these days they don't. But you have to act as if they did. I mean, it's really not much help, is it? So I was thinking about it carefully, all my experience within the lineage, and you know, the different ways that we use the word guru, and all the things that are important to us, and me personally playing this role, which, you know, a bit dodgy. You know, what do people think it means? You know, people use this word Lama, and what do they think it means? You know, what do I think it means? What does it involve? And now, even more importantly, I'm going to be handing over to you. Yesterday I handed over the role of being the head of the organisational side. Gratefully handing it over to very willing Shrimala Ghana and management team, and thank you very much. But I'm still playing the role of the teacher and the trainer of teachers. So what do I think I'm doing? And this summer I was really thinking it through. I've been struggling with this for years, decades even. I remember decades ago I got really angry with Khenpo Rinpoche because I was trying to discuss this problem with him about what does guru mean in Lama. You know, Tibetan Lamas are saying guru Lama all the time, but it's not clear to people what it means in practice. And then he said, well, that's a problem for you Westerners. It's nothing to do with us Tibetans. We don't have a problem. I was so angry. You know, I got up and I stormed out. I literally stormed out. I don't know if I've ever done it before in my life. I probably have, but I stormed out. I just so angry. I walked out of the room, down the corridor, out the front door, down the lane, at top speed, and anybody who asked me what's the matter, I don't know what I did, I just, so angry. Anyway, the energy of the anger sort of dissipated somewhat. I thought, oops. It's not polite, is it? So I went back to apologise to Rinpoche. I said, excuse me, for that behaviour, and then he was great actually. He just looked at me and he said, well, now you know what ego clinging is. But in actual fact, I noticed later in the day, in one of his talks, he was addressing the question to some extent. Yeah. And in a way, he has helped me a lot over the years to address this question in terms of my own role and my students and transmission and stuff like that. So I thought that was a fun story. But where was I? before I started the story. Yes, what it means. I think the biggest confusion arises because it's used in the singular, in principle, in a way that means almost identically. You could use it almost identically with Buddha. So the Buddha. The Guru is the Buddha. When you say the Buddha, you're talking about the Guru, in principle. And anybody who's playing the role of a Guru is playing the role of the Buddha for you in your life. So, since the Guru is the Buddha, then if you think of your teacher as playing the role of the Buddha for you in your life, you treat them with that kind of respect, you will get the blessing of the Buddha, because that's just how reality is. So it's really rather uncomplicated, and that's why Rinpoche said, I don't know why you find it such a problem. Because pretty straightforward when you put it that way, isn't it? Well, you can discuss it. But there's a tendency for it to be put this way, the other, to sound to us as Westerners, because we're not familiar with that. We're being told, this human person, with all their faults and oddities, you have to think they are the Buddha. So, whereas when we were quite inspired by the idea of the Buddha, we look at this person and we think, we have to bring our idea of Buddha down to this size and shape and this perception, which is not supposed to work that way around, it's supposed to work the other way around. That you recognise the Buddha is in this person, is acting through this person, the same as actually the Buddha can act through every person, because every person, including myself, has this Buddha nature. And this is what this relationship is about. So you can see why Rinpoche thought, well, why do you find it a problem? It's kind of straightforward, isn't it? But it does get very difficult because, yes, that not understanding that, not having the cultural background, not having the cultural setup where that's obvious, Westerners easily, start projecting to teachers. You're bowing to a teacher, so presumably they're God Almighty. Whereas Tibetans bow to a teacher because if they treat this person, whoever they are, as a Buddha, they will get the blessing of the Buddha. So, oh yeah, bow to anybody really. It's all positive. Whereas for us, it becomes quite heavy. Because, well, I'm not going to bow to them because I'm not sure I'm not sure who they are. Whereas, you could think, well, they're human beings, they must have Buddha nature, I can bow to that, no problem. But of course, it's not in our culture to bow in that way, to make prostrations that way. So we see some people bowing to monastics, for example. In Tibetan Buddhism, they don't really do that. Just because someone's a monastic, they don't necessarily get down on their hands and knees. In Theravadan countries, they do. But in the same way, it's for the same reason, because they represent the three jewels. They represent the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha. So here's an opportunity. By their being dressed as a monk, they're giving you the opportunity to treat them with that respect you would to the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha. But of course it's so easily misunderstood, isn't it, in the West? You see this bowing going on, you think, oh, this person must be very high. I mean, there might be, but as the Buddha said, there might be, but it's not enough evidence just on its own. But in fact, we need a lot of background in order to know how to evaluate the qualities of any spiritual practitioner, for that matter. So then I was thinking about our situation. You've got me. playing the role of Lama. What can I do for you? So I went through the different ways that I play this role, and I came up with 12 different ways in which I might play this role, and which others might play this role. And I noticed when I looked at the list that actually not all teachers play all these roles. Some of them only play one or two of them. And that's quite interesting, isn't it? When we're comparing one teacher with another. Some of them, for example, some of them create a Sangha situation, like I have. Many of them don't. Many of them, perhaps they just want to give Dhamma talks. So they're a Dhamma teacher, you can't say they're not a Dhamma teacher, but they don't particularly take personal students. And they don't create a Sangha situation. It's quite interesting, isn't it? So I'll go through this list with you. I went through it with the German group who came in the summer. Agnes's German group. Agnes has been doing a 2-year course of weekends with her students. She already had these students, I think about, how many was it? 40? 50? 50, yeah. Yeah, so she took them through, I think it was 3 weekends a year and a week retreat each year, going through the themes of the Discovering the Heart of Buddhism, and they ended up, the big finale, coming to the Hermitage to have the transmission and do the retreat with me, which they thought was great. And now they're going on to take partners each, because they're quite a big Sangha, so they're going to take it forward. So I actually found, because I was working on this, and they became interested, I gave them a talk on this, so I'll give you one now. So the role I put first was holding the Adhisthana of the lineage, which could be very simple, like I just described. You treat someone as a teacher because they represent the Buddha Dhamma Sangha. And if you treat them as Buddha Dhamma Sangha, you get the blessing of the Buddha Dhamma Sangha. So they're playing the role of connecting you to the blessing, to the Adhisthana. And of course, if they're very, they are very realised, that's, you're connecting very directly to the power of their realisation, the Adhisthana of their realisation. But it's always a positive thing to do. Even if they turn out to be even less realised than you are. It hasn't done you any harm, because you weren't bowing to the unrealised part of them, you were bowing to the Adhisthana that was coming through them because they're a human being. They have Buddha nature. And they have some sort of connection to the lineage, so okay, it won't be as powerful, but it's all good. No problem. Might make them arrogant, so you might have to do something about that, but it could delude them. That's one of the problems with it. And part of the reason why this is important is, and I think as Westerners we really need to realise this, is because we're very much individualistic, and we have a culture where that's held up as a great value. So when we hear about Dharma being a path that we have to follow ourselves, based on our own experience, it really links into that individualistic spirit. And it's a common question among Westerners, do I actually have to have a teacher? There's books, there's videos, recordings. Do I need a teacher actually? And all the books say, oh yes, you need a teacher. But then actually the books are better than the teachers that you find around. The people have more experience, they know more, the videos are better, So is there an intrinsic reason why I would need personal teacher? I think there is, actually. Going back to Mandala principle, and those talks Sri Shikpa's given. I think we talked about last year about self and other, didn't we? That play of self and other, and being able to open to other, and that every being has their world with them that we're linking into. So you could say, well, couldn't anyone be your guru in that sense? And actually, sometimes that's said. It could. But actually, are we up for it? Are we really able to do it in such a pure way? But definitely there's something to do with that living connection on the interface between self and other that's really important. It's not an individualistic thing which has no relationship to other. So I think if we took that as a first principle, obviously that could be, a poor connection or a good connection or an excellent connection, couldn't it? So I think it's a principle to bear in mind, that it is this meeting. It's whenever we meet anyone, when you think about with an open heart, there's a meeting, isn't there? Like, it doesn't feel like a meeting if one person's really shut down. If I'm shut down or they're shut down. We kind of know what that means, even though we could never tell anybody what it meant. We know it. And I think this is the essence of it, that we have to be able to open to the Buddha, and the Buddha is all pervading everywhere and in everyone. So if we're closing off, I'm doing it myself, I don't need anyone, we're already not really connecting. So that sense of needing to open out to other, I think is essential. And it's quite interesting, if I remember rightly, when the Buddha first got enlightened, he made some comment to that effect, didn't he? Who now will I worship? I'm the greatest of all beings. Now, who shall I worship? What's a being if there isn't other? And then he realised, there's the Dhamma. I can worship the Dhamma. That kind of opening to other can be to the truth itself. Which I think is very telling, that that's what he said at that point. And the other story that comes to mind is the story of Ashvajit. Are you all familiar with Ashvajit? I've often mentioned him. I'll tell you again. I can see some blank faces. The Shariputra and Magdalena had been looking for a guru for a long time, and had basically given up, but had said, well, if one or other of us does meet somebody that we think is, really enlightened, we'll tell the other one. And then Shariputra was out one day and he saw Ashvajit, who was I always think of him as a young monk, but he was, not a great elder. He was just a monk who met the Buddha and was practicing. And Shariputra was really impressed by his demeanour, and he felt really in his presence, again, this sense of it was a person he met. And he recognised something about this person. He said, "Who's your teacher?" And he told him it was the Buddha, and he thought, immediately he just wanted to meet him. And then he said, what does he teach? And there's this famous line, isn't there? Omya Dhamma Heta Prabhava Heta Tishan Tathagata Shavada Tishan Chayaniwada Evam Badi Mahashramanaya Svaha, which is used to this day by the whole Buddhist tradition as the quintessential words of truth that have power, to sort of magical power actually. You utter them in order to do various things, to stabilize blessings in various ways. And then Shariputra went with him to meet the Buddha. I think then Shariputra immediately got something and knew that this was it, and went with him to meet the Buddha, and then the Buddha received him and then gave him some instruction, and after, was it 2 weeks? He became enlightened, and Magdalena got him quite enlightened even quicker. But what's interesting that for the rest of his life, Shariputra, wherever he went, he always turned and bowed in the direction of Ashvajit. He never forgot Ashvajit was his first teacher. And I think that's quite salutary for all of us, really. You know, he actually met the Buddha, and yet he still bowed to Ashvajit. So there's something important there, isn't there, about he encountered the Buddha through this person, and he never forgot it. That connection, I think that's really what you could call a heart connection. He recognised that was a heart connection he was always going to honour. Whatever happened in all his lifetimes, he was going to honour that connection. And I think that's something we can learn from. You know, we can honour connections like that, with that sense that they're not in time, they're not in space. It's a mandala of Dhamma connections, lineage connections, that when we want to follow the path to awakening, we need to belong or be integral to a mandala that is centred on enlightenment. And that enlightenment then, if you like, pervades all the characters in that mandala, including ourselves. So we also become a link in the chain. We're connected to the Buddha through the people we meet, and they are through the people they met, and they are through the people they met. And that it creates one mandala, and it's not in time, it's not in space, but somehow it makes sense. Somehow one can live with that idea, can't you? You can sort of think, yeah, I could step into that. I could feel that. I could really. That makes sense. It's reasonable. It feels right. It's livable in. You can, living in that kind of a environment and way of thinking gives you a real sense of direction, worth, confidence, connection. Did I just say connection? Yeah, anyway, whatever. And aliveness, actually, a real sense of meaning. That's what the song is all about, isn't it? The meaning behind these connections. So the first thing is holding the adhisthana of the lineage. It's quite interesting because you often see people's blurb about Dhamma, including myself, that they have these lineage connections with blah blah blah. Oh, that looks very good. Know him. He's a good chap. That's Kempa Siddham so forth. Trungpa Rinpoche. Oh yeah, Kala Rinpoche. Wow, look at that. But what do I mean about I have a connection with them? I might have just met them once. I would have a connection, wouldn't I? So you could say, well, lots of people have lineage connections. So it is a sort of credential, but, from the point of view of principle, yeah, it's good. But you don't have to immediately think, well, they must be like Marpa and Milarepa then, really. The special thing about Marpa and Milarepa is that Marpa had realised complete Buddhahood and Milarepa had reached complete Buddhahood, and their connection was that that last point of realisation. Whereas when I talk about my connections with Kempa Rinpoche, it's not because I'm fully enlightened, and so that he was the one that fully enlightened me. I mean, yes, I think of him as inseparable from the Buddha and a highly, very realised person. So from that point of view, he's the Buddha. But my connection with him is a very strong heart connection with him, and a lot of instruction and teaching, and a lot of trust coming. He's trusted me a lot. So those are my connections. But it's a quite different quality to if, for example, I was now fully enlightened, I could tell you all about it. But I'm on the path, very much so. But I can connect you, and you can connect through me and my connections. And even more so, I feel I've been very, very fortunate and had very strong, good, instructive connections with these teachers. I've really learned something that I feel I could pass on. Something, in this world at this time. Whatever we've got, I think we need to pass on, don't we? So I want the same with my own students to feel that. So in a way it's all true, the Guru is the Buddha, but perhaps not in the sense that one might think as a Westerner it means. But nonetheless, really wonderful. Probably more wonderful than you might have thought. As a Westerner you might have thought it meant. Because as a Westerner you probably thought, I have to project all my ideas about what the Buddha is onto this person. And it doesn't quite add up. And good news is you don't have to do that. You absolutely don't have to do that. It can all be much more straightforward, as Rinpoche said, before I stormed out. The next, there's a lot goes with that, because then there's this whole idea of transmission and how that works, and who can give that, and how's that given, which I will skip over today. The second role that I put right up front was giving pointing out instructions. So this term pointing out is a translation of various terms, probably. I certainly use it in my translations. What do you use it? I use it for ngocha. Yeah. You could use it for mengak, couldn't you? Yeah. Damgak. Yeah. That's right. So, yeah. So it's a problem with the translation. There are various terms that get translated as pointing out. And of course in English, pointing out has its own meaning anyway, doesn't it? You point something out to someone, it's kind of like, sounds pretty good anyway. So there's plenty of room for confusion to come in there. Because nurture already is somewhat of a controversial term. I think this came up when we were studying Tashi Namgyal's clarifying the natural state. There was a whole discussion about whether this nurture, the big pointing out, is that at the beginning when you first point out to the student the nature of their mind sufficiently for them to start practicing on the basis of that? Or is it at the end of the path when this guru has really tested you out and checked and double checked that you are actually now, if you like, realised? You've really realised it. So I think Tashi Namgyal thought it should be that end, should be applied that end, but many people use it for the other end. And there's another term as well called, in the Trungpa Rinpoche used, was Tamachi Shepa, and they use letters. What's it called? TGS. They use TGS, which is Tamachi Shepa, which is ordinary mind. And so this is sometimes sort of another term which is very similar, kind of pointing out with so you've got this phenomenon where in Tashi Namgyal, if we go along with the way he's using this pointing out, it's a long process one-to-one with students, checking them all the way, and then authenticating their realisation and saying, okay, that's it, And then you've got at the other end where a teacher has many students and they all need some kind of introduction to the nature of mind, but there's hundreds of them, and you get them all in the room at one time, and if you're very realised, like somebody like Trungpa Rinpoche, you can actually transmit something through the power of your presence. And even if students are not on the spot, suddenly get some experience, at least they can feel they've made that connection person to person that could actually ripen over time. So there's a lot that might be going on when you're told this is a pointing out, this is Tanochi Shepa, or this is a special. I mean, Khenpo Rinpoche himself told me that he would come and give Ngotra for Tashi Namgyal book to my students. And I wondered how he was going to do that, because I had in mind this process of working with the students. And of course he doesn't even speak English. And he wasn't going to be there for very long either. So I wondered what he meant. And when he came, he told us all to meditate as he read the text. And he said to us to think of it as being the empowerment to the best we could. And through the power of his presence and his realization, I'm sure something happened. And certainly some people since then have told me that they've never been the same since. That really, really helped them with their practice. So there you are again. That's a mixture, isn't it? That role of the adhisthana, the presence, and at the same time, and he called it, at that point, he called it a wong, which is usually, the translation of an abhisheka. But, so there's some sliding about going on. But the principles are all the same. It's a different combination of the principles. It would depend on the disciple and the guru, what exactly was going on. So somebody who's very, almost enlightened, like Shariputra, would be present at Khenpo Rinpoche reading the text, or what Khenpo Rinpoche was doing, probably like Shariputra and Ashwajit. He would kind of get it. And that would be not because of what it was, but because of where the guru and the student were and what their connection was. So, in a way, what the guru is doing, or the teacher is doing, is creating a situation where that could happen. And even if it doesn't happen at that time, if the students have enough faith and the teacher is genuine enough, something happens because it's a meeting of some kind. Something happens, and that has karmic consequences. That has consequences in terms of our connection with the Mandala of awakening. And how those consequences manifest is very much up to us as practitioners. So you can understand how once you've got a culture based on these principles, it's all quite straightforward and obvious. But from a culture where none of this is commonplace, and all these different turns of phrase can easily, lead us astray. Especially this pointing out, because in some ways, every time you're talking to somebody about the nature of your experience and they point something out to you, and you get some further insight, it's a pointing out instruction, isn't it? And I don't want to say it isn't. On the other hand, it's not this end of the scale of a ngotra. It's sort of at the beginning end of the scale, where something's starting to happen. And of course, somebody could actually not know what they were doing. Nonetheless, you do get an insight. Or somebody actually could fairly well know what they were doing up to a certain point, and the student could pick it up and actually not get the point, but think they had. That's all possible, isn't it? You can't imagine it isn't possible, can you? Of course it's possible. So just the fact that somebody's received a pointing out from somebody doesn't necessarily mean they picked it up right. So, we have to kind of build a conceptual or cultural framework or an ethos where all those possibilities are well known, and we're all kind of working within that framework in our own way and making our own judgment quite how much we don't know what's going on for other people, but we have our suspicions sometimes, don't we? You know, and that's all right, that's fair enough. that's intelligence at work. And sometimes we're surprised, sometimes we're misjudged, and sometimes we're pleasantly surprised, sometimes we're sadly surprised. And I'm sure a lot of Sogyo Rinpoche's students are very sadly surprised, because it's very possible many of them have received from him, within the context of the Guru, he's the Buddha, and their faith, their openness, his connection with the lineage. Quite possible some of them really have a very strong Dhammic connection with him that they need to continue to value. So this is where Khenpo Rinpoche's advice to marriage partners applies also to relationship with gurus, which is you see the partner or your guru's faults as self-empty and illusory, and you see their good qualities as the Buddha qualities, which are real. And if we keep to that principle, we can keep a good connection with all the teachers that we've received some insight and help from. And that's actually very important, because the danger for Westerners is we go from one extreme to the other. We project all this stuff onto this poor person, and then when they show their feet of clay, they go, feet of clay, tell the newspapers, it's abuse, And then they lose any connection at all. They kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater, and they may be put off the spiritual path for, lifetimes. So it's really important to build the right kind of context within our Sangha, so that we can accommodate all of these possibilities and keep the principles clearly in mind, and know what we're working with. So then there's the creating a teaching situation. We've talked about the 5 certainties. The teacher and the teaching. At a certain time, a certain place, a teacher teaches a certain teaching to a certain group of people. That's the mandala of the 5 certainties, certain place, certain... that kind of certain. And that's a mandala, isn't it? So every time there's any transmission of Dhamma going on, it's a mandala. And every mandala has this as its principle, that the teacher is teaching a certain assembly at a certain time and place. And so whenever we're in that situation, karmically, dharmically, it's very powerful. So here we are now creating such a mandala. And even if I were just to sit here and say, all conditioned things are impermanent, and you all to think, that's true, and you all meditated on it, that's a perfect situation. There's nothing false, that's totally genuine. Some monks do that. In Theravada countries, they may not know much Dhamma, and they're offered the food from the patrons. They receive the food in order for them to make the merit, make the punya. So it's all energy exchange, and then they just say something very simple that's true. And then the people who hear it, they receive it because they recognise, this is enacting this teaching mandala, and then it can all be dedicated for the benefit of all beings. I think that's kind of the ethos that we could easily develop, isn't it? We can have that kind of sense. That's what we're doing. And the danger is in the West is that the people who teach Dharma, the ones who are most successful are probably the ones with most sort of charisma, And that's not necessarily the right reason for, one thing is a lot of good energy is wasted because it all goes towards the one with charisma. The chances are it's not doing that person with charisma much good, because they could get carried away with their own self-importance, especially if they're not well connected to a sangha that's keeping them in order. function of the Sangha to keep you in order. So I've always thought that's a huge danger in the West, that we are very seduced by celebrity and charisma, aren't we? Sort of think that's what it's all about. You know, the more students you've got, or the more exposure you've got, or the more fame you've got, the more books you've written, whatever. This is what's important, but it isn't really important. I mean, not necessarily, as the Buddha says, that in itself is not enough. There has to be much more to it. And the connectedness of the person is more important than anything. How well connected they are. You know, are they an individual doing their own thing, or are they really well connected? You know, these heart connections with others in the lineage, their colleagues, their teachers. You know, how well connected are they? That's probably more important than how famous they are, or how even entertaining they are. So that's creating a teaching situation, and Sangha building, as I said at the beginning, some teachers don't ever really get into that. They're quite happy to just be invited from one place to another, and just, I mean, in a way, Khenpo Rinpoche was like that for a long time, wasn't he? He just went from place to place. He did. He did have his core of students, but I'm not too sure.
No, he didn't want to have
An organisation. So that now we're left a little bit not quite sure how to go forward, aren't we?
That's part of it.
Yeah, that's part of it. So he didn't actually do that. When he first came, he was talking about doing that, actually, quite strongly, wasn't he?
Yeah, but he didn't want to be abbot, for example. He refused to.
Yeah, he didn't want to be abbot of the in the Dordogne. But then he did start talking about a Sangha that would have its that would stand for something, and he's used that language to me as well, that it has to stand.
I don't know. He had different attitudes also.
Yeah, that's right. He did do various things. So we won't point to anybody, but definitely some people don't particularly create a Sangha situation, don't train people up to be teachers, don't set up any kind of institution that can then be handed on. I mean, in the end, of course, he set up these nunneries, which are...
Yeah, that was different.
Yeah.
But he did. At some point, he gave us certificates.
Yeah, he did.
Translators.
Yes, he did.
But he always said, I train translators to help
Yeah.
centers.
Yeah, that's right.
My own.
That's right. That's right. That's what I'm saying. Not every teacher does do that. So, you can see that different teachers, some of them do put a lot of energy into building an institution or institutions or centres or sanghas, as in my case, or whatever, and some don't. And so you find that sometimes I find students of lamas who coming to me because they haven't got a sangha, rather than because they don't have a teacher who's teaching them in the sense of some of the other senses that are coming. So then I thought another kind of role that you can take, and some teachers might be using all the time to look after their monastery or something like that without doing much formal teaching. And some of them are just doing formal teaching and not setting anything up particularly. And the teaching they're giving might simply be in an institution where they're required to talk about the doctrine for students who want to pass their exams and become scholars of some kind. It's quite interesting if you're receiving teaching in an academic institution, which I did. And I remember Alexis Sanderson, it wasn't Buddhist, it was Shaivism, Kashmiri Shaivism. And he gave a brilliant exposition of basically the same sort of Gomrim as we have, the same sort of progressive stages of meditation on emptiness, but written by a Shaivite, going right up, opposing all the Buddhist views, up to coming to the Shentong view, at which case he described the Shentong view and he said, this we don't dispute. And I felt it was like, it's really powerful spiritually, hearing this teaching. And then Alexis just shut the book and said, okay, now let's go and have coffee. That's what they call enlightenment. Let's go and have coffee. As if to say, well, that's the topic closed. I just found it so interesting that he had actually played the role of a teacher of the doctrine without in any way getting involved in any other aspect of the Guru's role. It's quite interesting, and of course, any kind of... there's loads of academic institutions in the Buddhist world where people are trained just to study and to pass their exams and become teachers. And they are teachers, you can't say they're not teachers, and they're Buddhist teachers, you can't say they're not Buddhist teachers, but somehow that's just a very small part of the role of a teacher. And some Buddhist teachers who are very good at teaching practice would be lost in such an institution, like Gena Rinpoche. He got all his instruction as meditation instruction, pointing out instruction, adhisthana, his connection, his practice. When it came to reading, he was not even very good at reading. But actually, it didn't matter. The Karmapa still put him in as the Lama in his main seat in Europe, because something else was more important. And then you've got someone like Khenpo Rinpoche who's got both. But nonetheless, it's quite interesting what what these different roles are and how relatively important they are. Then another role, there is that role of actually teaching practice. So teaching practices, so if you get lamas who travel around and they might give teachings, they might say, okay, I'm going to give you Tara practice, I'm going to give you Vajrasattva practice, and they come and they give the practice and then they're gone, and you make of it what you can. And that's done a lot. They're giving the practices, so they are teaching them, but they're not actually particularly following up on it. A lot of that goes on. So then the sixth role I put was where you do follow up on it. I've called it giving personal guidance. So that would be accepting someone to be your student who you will then guide, and you expect them to, they ask you, what shall I do? And you tell them what to do, and they come back to you and say, well, I've done that, and this is what's happening, and then you listen, and you advise them further, and then over time, you're guiding them with their practice. Now, some people might not be at all confident about giving a Dharma talk in front of lots of people, may not even want to. They don't much learning, or they don't have learning, but they don't want to give talks. Nonetheless, they make very good guides. And when you think about it, in our Sangha, we've got our mentors, haven't we, in the mentor training? There's a lot of this kind of personal guidance going on. So that's a really important part of a teacher's role. It's a possibility in terms of a role. And, over time I can see that developing into people feeling that actually the person who's mainly teaching them is their mentor or their teacher within the Sangha. Even unofficially, I notice it's happening. People do start to recognise that they are actually learning from somebody. So that comes up. Are they my students? Are they the students of my students? And does it matter? It actually doesn't matter. But anyway, that is a really important role, isn't it? Some people are going to be very good at that. Of course, they will be, this elements of the other things will be involved. Then the next one that came up, which is going to become an issue in our Sangha, I think, is receiving gifts on behalf of the lineage. As I said at the beginning, in the Theravada country, for example, any monk would be seen to be, I'm looking at the monk there, would be seen automatically to be a person who should be in receipt of gifts. So you would go to the temple to get the blessing from the monk who was there, or the monks that were there. You'd go there, you'd make them all lots of food offerings, clothes offerings. Maybe you could offer them more, maybe you could offer them medicines or a place to live, and you would really focus on those monks as being the people you were going to give to as your way of involving yourself in the mandala. You know, this is the mandala of awakening, I want to make a living connection, I'm going to make my offerings, somebody has to receive them. Sometimes they made in front of Buddha images, but that can be a little bit cumbersome after a while, because if the image is going to accept them, what are you going to do with them all? Because they don't belong to anyone else except the image, and the image isn't going to use them. So I went to a lecture once of what they did in South India, I think it was, with all the offerings that were made to the images and the temples that didn't belong to anyone. And they, storerooms full of riches. But you couldn't do anything with it because it didn't belong to anyone. And if you took it, you'd be using what belonged to the Buddha. You'd be stealing from the Buddha. It's quite interesting. Yeah, I found that fascinating. So, what sort of... people now have got used to the idea of making offerings when they receive teaching. And that, of course, is very beneficial because you're making a very strong karmic connection, dharmic connection with the teaching by making, making offerings. And, in the stories, all the stories within the Buddhist tradition about teachers and disciples, it's all huge emphasis put on the gifts that are brought, isn't it? And that connection, how important that connection is and how it's cemented by these gifts. Of course, in a culture like our own, that's a very difficult thing to teach, isn't it? Me sitting up here saying it's terribly good for you to give me lots of stuff. it's not... It's not going to go down very well. It needs the whole context, really, and even in itself, as I pointed out, it already produces problems. In Buddhist cultures, there's all sorts of problems associated with the students needing to bring gifts, but then producing a kind of dynamic where being a lama becomes a career by means of which you can support your friends and family. And then that's obviously going to be corrupting, isn't it? So they've got words for this in the Tibetan tradition, but it's very tricky. And there's a lot of that going on in these days with lamas coming to the West. And lots of problems coming out of that, where culturally, and this isn't Buddhist culture, it's just culture, their families see them coming to the West and getting Western disciples as a way of supporting the family at home. And that seems quite moral within their culture. But actually, it can cause all sorts of problems, as you can imagine. Yeah.
I didn't hear what you said. What was that about home? They send the gifts home, did you say?
No, the people, they become rich, and then the family at home benefit from that, because obviously they're going to look after their family. And then they invite their family over, and then they want their disciples to keep their family and send them to school and look after them. And that seems fine to them, because culturally that's kind of normal. It's become normal. Whether it's not right, from the Buddhist point of view, it's quite questionable. But from their social point of view, it's kind of normal. And it's, somebody who came to the West, received lots of money from Western students, used it for all their Western students and didn't help the people at home, would seem quite wrong. And in a way, even to us it would seem a bit wrong, but it can get very skewed. It can get very skewed. So it's going to be an issue for us, this receiving of gifts. Who and how to receive gifts. And for myself, I've very much taken on the role of building a Sangha. So I'm very motivated to receive gifts because then I can support the Sangha with it. But when I start thinking of, well, I'm now training other people to be teachers and they're going to be receiving gifts, like now I receive enough to not have to worry about a livelihood. It would be very good for other people to reach the point where they didn't have to worry about a livelihood and could just be Dhamma teachers full time. But you can see immediately how are we going to manage that? Who and how and what point, and so these are things we're going to have to think about. But I do play that role of receiving gifts. It's very appropriate, very appropriate. It's made a lot of good karma. Definitely go to heaven. So then you've got the next role is authorizing teachers. And not all teachers do that. Some teachers teach. Often this happens in, you get a Tibetan Lama coming and he's travelling around and he leaves somebody behind who then teaches in his place. But they're a kind of junior teacher and often, whether they're Tibetan or Westerner, they tend to stay in that position. They don't tend to move into the position of, they then start authenticating other people to be teachers. It sort of remains in the hands of the Lama, perhaps who started the centre or whatever it is. But it is an important role, because if the Dharma is going to pass down the generations, the next generation of teachers do need authenticating. And who and how is that done is a question which is kind of floating in the air. So I'm hoping that what I've written will help help even start to think about the issues involved with that, actually. So then, I've missed one out. So that was authorizing teachers, but just before that, I had authenticating understanding, which goes back to what I was saying in the Ngotra, the first one. No, the second one, pointing out. So you could have people who are at this end, the lower end of the pointing out spectrum, doing some pointing out, but could they actually authenticate what they've, if a student said to them, okay, I listened to your pointing out and this is what I've understood, is it right? Somebody might feel quite confident to point out something they've realised, but then they might feel, I'm not sure what you're saying, whether that's what I'm saying or not, or if it's actually even more profound than what I'm saying, or which way is this going, are you teaching me, or, it's kind of quite an edge there. So who could, for example, do the final nurture, like your Mapa and your Milarepa end, and who could do something that would do for now, quite a high end? Because obviously, if you're honest, you can say to somebody, as far as I can tell, that's it. But I'm not actually as realised as all that. So I think maybe you should still maybe try to find somebody who could, with more realisation than I have. You can do that. And I imagine that's what I do. I point out as far as I can, I authenticate as far as I can, but with the proviso, you do realise, don't you, that I'm nowhere, this isn't your Marpa Miller type of situation, it's something, but it'll help you towards that, I definitely feel I can help and that you can help each other towards that, but who knows how far we'll get in this life. At least we're making progress and we're making good connections, that's what's important. And then another role is giving vows. People give refuge with bodhisattva vows. Give the precepts. Give monks and nuns vows. So again, if somebody takes you on as a student and then gives you some training and teaching, that gives you these vows, I mean, they are your Dhamma teacher, aren't they? They are your teacher. You need to see them as the activity of the Guru coming through those persons. You are actually making that strong connection. They are the witnesses. That's a very powerful and strong karmic and dharmic connection you're making. So it's important. It's important. Technically, if you've received refuge or you've received Bodhisattva vow, you could give it to somebody else. But if it's going to be done in a way that people have confidence in, you really want to make sure that they are people who are good practitioners, people who are reliable, who are not going to, they're not going to not respect those vows themselves. So, as a Sangha, we're going to need to think about that and think about how we want to handle that, so that what you want is to have a situation where the students can feel in a very simple, direct way that they can have faith in this, that it's genuine, it's reliable, it's good Dhamma, karma connections, and that the teacher has confidence that the students understand well enough to make that a good connection for them, and then that to be something that communicates itself throughout the Sangha, so that everybody feels this is something very authentic that's going on, and they can have confidence and faith in it. That's what we're working towards. That's the kind of ethos we're working towards. I'll leave out the whole Vajrayana issue, because in my mind, Vajrayana is known as Sangak, which is not public. It's between the student and the disciple, when the student and the teacher, when the teacher thinks it's the right time. And of course, Tibetans, their whole business is about giving public abhishekas. And when Ritzinship and I were finding out about all of this from different lamas, Khenpo Rinpoche, we asked Khenpo Rinpoche about this, how Vajrayana worked, and he explained it, and then we said, so why do lamas give public abhishekas? And he said, you better ask them. Which I thought was a brilliant answer. And I'm noticing that in the this discussion around Sogye Rinpoche, that some of these teachers are saying, well, as soon as you've received, I think Zongso Rinpoche was saying, wasn't he, that as soon as when you've received the abhisheka from the teacher, then you have this samaya with the teacher, and the fault is when the teacher doesn't make sure the students are prepared enough. Yes, but of course that's their business. They go around the world, they've been doing it for decades now. There's loads and loads of people who've been at these abhishekas without even knowing what they're doing. I mean, the other day, a few years with Khandra Rinpoche in South Wales, the people had been told you could come here to meet Khandra Rinpoche, and this was open to, anyone. And she came in and she straight away, very graciously, started giving us an abhisheka for Yeshe Sogyal. And she decided that she'd like me to be, to be the person who went round giving people things. And there was one woman, I think I had to even have a red spot on their face. I had to do various things. And every time I came to her, she said, I just came in as a visitor. I thought, this is what it comes to. It isn't right, is it? It really isn't right. And I was talking to somebody the other day who said that her lama, what's her name? Her lama in Jean, yes, in Canada, had said it was unethical to do that. And I thought, oh, it's interesting, because I think I would say the same, actually. It's certainly, it can't be Vajrayana, really. I mean, it must be working on the level of the first role. Of, you've got the adhisthana, people coming, that you're making a connection. So, actually, I think as far as Westerners are concerned, it's all good, isn't it? You don't have to give them fancy abhishekers. You could just give them, you could give them profound Dhamma teachings. As soon as you start saying, oh, it's abhisheka, it's quite interesting. Some people are very drawn by that. Yeah, but then actually, what do they get? I mean, I feel they're cheated, because they just. I don't think Rinpoche cheated us when he gave us what he called a wong, because, he did say, oh, and if you want to follow it up, Shenpen will teach you, so he didn't abandon people. But you wonder, well, what did people actually think they got? And of course they did get a connection, it's true. And these, all these lamas are connected to the lineage. They've all got, family, they've all got, all sorts of dharmic connections that they are connecting us up to. But I don't think that's... in a way it's all right until they start saying you now have samaya. And you've got to see this person as perfect Buddha, and they're looking at you and they can see all your flaws. And then they start turning their heads inside out, trying to put it all together in their mind, and I don't... I'd rather save you that. So then the next one I've got down is presiding at rituals. And I put it down because some lamas, that's mainly what they do. They're trained, especially in Tibetan culture, you get a lama who's trained to do rituals, and so the main thing that the lama does is preside over rituals of birth, of death, marriages, festival days, special days, full moon. They will officiate, and at all the pujas, they'll do all the rituals. And some lamas, they just come and they maybe do the ritual. These people want to practice this, some practice, and they need a abhisheka. So the lama comes in, gives the ritual of the abhisheka. Everyone's told they've now had the abhisheka, now they can do the practice. And actually that lama doesn't do much else. It's a role you can play. And, I find myself, I preside over rituals like offerings to the refuge, giving the vows, those rituals, doing the smoke pujas, doing the naga offerings, doing things at the stupa. It's kind of an obvious thing to ask me to do it, because I'm the lama, but I'm just playing that role of being the person who does the ritual. In fact, anyone who knows the ritual could do it, really, but it's kind of part of the role. Again, with conviction, like if everybody feels has a certain sense, oh, this is a person I really trust, I'm glad they're doing it. I'm the same, I like it when other people do rituals. So there's that. It could be to a greater or lesser extent. Some, like Khenpo Rinpoche, I think largely would say he's quite minimal with rituals, wasn't he? He wasn't a great one for rituals. Made them up himself. Brilliant. Okay, so then you've got the 12th one, which I think is the one that we really think is the most exciting of all, and we all long for. And that's this guru who will cut through our ego clinging with such skill. We imagine ourselves, like we'll always obey the guru, and the guru is going to give us a hard time, but we're going to go through it and we're going to get with his one-to-one relationship with a guru who's really involved with us, and we're meeting the guru and the guru is coming back at us. I think, sounds very dramatic. Sort of, even if we don't think we're up for it, we kind of think that's what a guru would do. Like Marpa Miller, Marpa really gave Milarepa a hard time. And so when our guru starts giving us a hard time, we think, oh, this is like Marpa and Milarepa, it's cutting through my ego, this is great. Well, actually, our life cuts through our ego the whole time. It's true, isn't it? And a guru can have a good old go at us, and all we do is call it abuse and walk off. So it's quite an interesting, when Trungpa Rinpoche is describing this as the Vajra Guru, minding your business and really getting in there, and you read it in his description of the Guru, and sometimes Vigdin Shikpo talks about this, real relationship with what I would call a Siddha Guru, a Siddha who has the realisation and the power. He can really see how, like Marpa did with Milarepa, he could see this was going to really help him, even though it seemed horrible. We kind of, I think there's quite a strong sense in the West that that's what it's about. Would you say that there's a kind of excitement about all of that? That somehow we're going to be challenged. And then when things get difficult with a guru, because then automatically things get difficult, even with such a nice person as me, I do my best to be nice and accommodating. People get very frightened of me, or annoyed, or angry. Yeah. I don't do it deliberately. I honestly don't. That hard look I gave you is probably me thinking, I wonder what she means. It's like Khenpo Rinpoche once, when he first came, and he was at La Pujar, and somebody had picked up hitchhikers and brought them to see Rinpoche. And I was sitting there, I think maybe I was translating, I'm not sure. And then they introduced these people, and then Rinpoche just said, "Yes, and what do you want?" And of course they didn't have any idea where they were, what was going on, so they said, "Well, nothing." "Well, go and talk to him, he can explain it to you." And then, it seemed very abrupt and very cutting, And then Rinpoche sort of looked at me and said, "I'm no good at conversation." He has people coming in all day long. He can always find things to say to people. I never know what to say. Which was very sweet. But probably they, who knows, they might have felt this was the most cutting and direct transmission they'd ever had. So I find that really interesting, that so much emphasis is put on this aspect, especially when you start talking about, this Sogyo Rinpoche thing with the, you've got Samaya with the Guru, you're supposed to do what the Guru says, you're not supposed to criticise the Guru, so therefore you have to interpret all this bad behaviour as somehow a teaching, and isn't this wonderful, we're getting all this difficult teaching, if it isn't difficult it isn't really a teaching, blah 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 blah, and it becomes like a sect. It just comes like a sect. Just people just working very hard at, holding on to their views and trying to make something out of it. It can get very sect-like. I'm afraid that's the only name for it, really. And that's when abuse can go on for years. Really. Sadly. Oh.
I only have 11.
I got 14.
Well, you can divide them up how you like. But the ones I've written here are holding the Adhisthana of the lineage, pointing out instructions, creating a teaching situation, formal teaching doctrine, teaching practices, giving personal guidance, receiving gifts, authenticating understanding, authorizing teachers, giving vows, presiding at rituals, and challenging the student's ego. which I've called the Siddha Guru, because really it's the Siddha that Trungpa Rinpoche is talking about when he talks in those terms, that he himself, how to relate to me. I am a Siddha and this is what I'm doing to you. And, you know, if you've got Trungpa Rinpoche as your teacher, wow, you've got special karma. You know, it's kind of like, I would put that in a different scale of things, really. The
book's going to come out and we can all look through that, can't we?
Yes. So, what I was hoping you would then like to discuss was, bearing in mind, now is the time to think about what heart connections mean, to talk about either how to apply this in taking our place in our Sangha situation, and how to apply it to the hierarchy of our connections. Because, you know, we have got these heart connections with the Sangha, but we also have heart connections with other parts of our world, haven't we? We've got our family, we've got our work, we've got various aspects of our life. So, when it says, now is the time to think of what heart connections mean, how does that apply to all of that? So either of those questions or both, to get you going. And then if you have questions, that, you know, start to, please, if you could write them down and let me have them before this afternoon, that would be helpful. Okay, and so we can have questions and talk discussion in my next session. Okay. We dedicate this punya to the enlightenment of all sentient beings. May all sentient beings realize complete and perfect awakening. May the heart's awareness awaken in the unawakened. Where it has begun to stir, may it never fade, and may it awaken fully. Chanchu Semne Rinpoche Mache Kanam Jejuji Jeba Nyamba Mabadam Kame Kongdu Mewashu Chanchu Semne Rinpoche Mache Kanam Jejuji Jeba Nyamba Mabadam Kame Kongdu Mewashu Chanchu Semne Rinpoche Mache Kanam Jejuji Jeba Nyamba Mekadam Kame Kongdu Mewashu. You shine with the radiance of intelligence, skillful play. You excellent qualities. You manifest an ocean of Dhamma, with each point clear and distinct. In all 10 directions the melodious sound of your song reverberates. You sing the songs of the deep meaning of the view and meditation. Genuine spiritual friend, may your feet continue their playful dance. We beg you to always remain. Certain young can shingi balancing. Till them down, so madre so sonam.